Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for Engaging Tribal Communities in Your E-MDT Work. I'm Marty Washington with the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life. And this webinar is brought to you by the National Elder Abuse Multidisciplinary Team Training and Technical Assistance Center. I would like to just take a moment to thank the Office on Victims of Crime for funding this webinar today and remind you that the thoughts and comments and information you hear today are those of the author and don't necessarily reflect the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. And as you are aware, it really helps if we keep ourselves on mute unless you're talking, cuts down on background noise. Please either raise your hand or throw a question in the chat and we will get back to you. And if you have any problems, email me at mwashington@ncall.us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters today.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you are. I'm Jacque Gray, and I'm a Choctaw Cherokee descendant, and a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, an elder, and wear many other hats as well. I am a research associate professor emerita from the University of North Dakota. And I currently work in a number of different projects, and I've worked in Indian country for over 45 years.
And hello, I'm Wendelin Hume. I'm also at the University of North Dakota. I was born and raised in Northwestern Ontario, Canada, but hence my background. But it is a pleasure to be here and to present and share some information with you. I've worked in the past with Jacque, and I also work with a current project. As you can see there, we call it Nishi. I wanted to mention that as a result of today's presentation, we are hoping that viewers will be able to do a couple of key things. One of them is to be able to understand and define cultural humility and understand a couple of its key principles and when you might use that. Identify cultural considerations so you can apply culturally sensitive approaches to your E-MDT work. Apply strategies in building mutually beneficial relationships that are productive, but also at the same time honor sovereignty and culture. Demonstrate strategies for how you can initiate a respectful, culturally sensitive contact with any tribal partners. And then we'll close with identifying some key jurisdictional considerations for you to keep in mind. Jacque, did you have any acknowledgements you'd like to share? I think you're muted.
We'd like to acknowledge those tribal lands that all of you may be residing on now, and how tribal nations have stewarded those lands over the years. And although through colonization, those lands may have been taken from us, we still have that calling to those homelands. I'm currently in Oklahoma, currently the home of 39 tribes, and the original tribes were the Caddo, the Wichita, and the Apache.
And I'll echo what Jacque said. I'm currently presenting to you from Grand Forks, North Dakota, and North Dakota is home of the Hidatsa, Riccara, and other nations like Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, and also the Turtle Mountain Chippewa. So it is a pleasure to present with you today. So let's go ahead and start with a brief discussion of that term cultural safety. I think anytime we try to bring up a topic, like how can we work with another culture, those types of things, well, we want information from them. But before they're going to feel willing and safe to share with us and let us know what it is that they need or that they want, we need to put some effort into creating a space where they feel safe, where they feel confident. So the idea of cultural safety is to have a space where everyone in that space feels that here we are free from racism, we are free from any forms of discrimination, despite what might be going on in the broader world around us, despite what might have happened historically. At this moment, in this space, we're choosing a different way of interacting. In order to do that, we do need to recognize that there are some innate power imbalances that are set up in the broader community around us. And we also wish to recognize and respect historical issues and historical contexts, and not just the history, but to understand how that extends into the present and what those contemporary contexts are that came from some of those historical beginnings. So it goes beyond some of the usual terms you might hear, like to be sensitive, cultural sensitivity, or just to be aware. I am aware there's Indigenous people, or I took this one class or I read this one book, so I'm culturally competent. You know, this may be true, and those are all very good beginning steps. But I think it really helps if you can set up a situation when you're having your meetings, when you're bringing people together, whatever it is, that you take great effort from the beginning to make sure that that space you're inviting others into is free from that racism and discrimination. So at the same time that we want to leave certain things out of the space, we also want to embrace things like the strength of cultures that people bring into our meeting spaces, to recognize how various social determinants have impacted Indigenous people's lives and will continue to do so into the future. And it takes a little bit of humility. They refer to it as cultural humility, to understand how we each might bring our own biases a little bit. Like we love our own cultures, right? That's great. We should. But the moment that you do that, you just need to be careful that it doesn't make you think any less of anyone else's culture, right? So if you can recognize maybe a bias you have or something that you thought was true that you realize now is not, right? You can overcome that and make special efforts around that, and it will then improve how you treat other people. And here's that term, cultural humility. So what is it? Well, it's not a one and done. You could think of cultural humility as kind of like, you know, we love learning, we'll learn all our lives. Well, we do learn. We learn about our cultures, but we should also be open to learning about the cultures of other people throughout our lives. It's not just this one time or this one meeting or this one training, right? Like seek it out and always be self-reflecting and learning, thinking and learning and listening open-mindedly without judgment. In many traditional Indigenous cultures, listening is like one of the greatest signs of respect, not just talking or overriding, but to sit back and listen with an open mind and open heart to try to understand as best as you can. And it takes some humility to say, maybe I don't know everything. Is there something here I might learn? Right? Let's listen and see what we can do. So we designed our presentation today with kind of these key aspects in mind, not just as we present to you, and hopefully you're willing to listen and learn, but also then when you're interacting with other cultures, or other cultures are asking, how should we interact with you? These are some things that you might want to share. I wanted to show this map about some of the indigenous populations. If we were to look at indigenous populations initially, before settlement by outsiders of this country, you would see a different map. But as it stands now, 2009 through 11 is when they did this particular map. You can see, though, that indigenous populations are, in fact, a minority population, right? We don't make up one of the biggest minority groups, but it is interesting to see how widespread indigenous people are. And I think sometimes when people look at maps like these, like the very dark blue areas, where there's a number of tribes present, a number of reservations present, a lot of people think, well, that is where all the indigenous people live, on a reservation in those places. But you'll notice the light blue spread throughout the country, because people, indigenous people, don't just reside in rural areas. They don't just reside on reservations. We have urban natives, right? We have individuals spread everywhere. Even if you're in a state without a federally recognized tribe, there may be a state recognized tribe, or there may be other ways to recognize tribe, or maybe there's not a tribe, but it does not mean there are not indigenous people in your midst. Jackie's going to talk a little bit later about how to make some of those connections and reach out in that way when it's not as easy as here's the tribe. But even when there is a tribe, we need to be careful. Just because they're there doesn't mean making this connection is going to be just really quick and easy, right? If we take the right steps, this will go over a lot better. So one of the things in taking the right steps is to recognize, I think, and understand history. Now, I know that there are some out there that say history isn't important. The very definition of history is it's in the past, right? We're here in the present, just move forward, forget about it, and move on. But as a very cultural people that pass down traditions, stories, knowledge, beliefs, the past isn't just the past, it is with us now. It will be with us for the next 7 generations. We don't make that kind of a clear distinction in our culture. So it is important to understand how things you think of as past affect us now and in the future. It's often referred to as multi-generational trauma, things that may have happened to great grandparents, then got passed on to grandparents, and so on. So it's usually focused on a specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group. When we use that term, historical trauma, you'll also usually see when it is like a major event that oppressed this particular group of people. But when it comes to Native Americans, we could look at that as, for instance, the violent colonization would have been that major event that was definitely oppressive and left a lasting impact on the people. I don't have time to go into a detailed history, but in a nutshell, we could probably suffice it to say that the violence was so widespread that it did result in the genocide of many unique tribes and cultures. Not all indigenous people are one group, all the same. We have different customs, different backgrounds, different languages, different origin stories, different colors that are sacred, different things. We have some commonality, of course, between us, but we are unique. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we look at what happened. There were unique people that no longer are because of this violence. That will, of course, impact the surviving surrounding people when we realize that. Furthermore, for those that did survive, faced forced removal from homelands, sometimes numerous times. Move here, you'll be okay. No, never mind, we want that. Move here, you'll be okay. Oh, no, changed our mind. Move here. Yeah, you get the idea, right? Even once you are moved to a place, things like the allotment process, where they take lands out from under you if you don't pay taxes or other things that people didn't understand, or even having your children taken away from you, put into boarding schools, maybe never coming back from those boarding schools. And if so, they came back with a loss of culture, a loss of language, a loss of understanding spiritual traditions, just such a loss. And then they're set to produce the next generation. Obviously, history does continue to impact us today. And in fact, when we think about it as we're facing voting and other things coming up, it was not until 100 years ago, right? A little less than that. It was back in 1924. We're now 2024, so 100 years ago, that Native Americans were even considered citizens here on our own lands. So some of these inequities continue. They impact our health, our well-being, our trust of outside forces and authority figures, understandably, right? And so that's why we wanted to share a few things with you today, how we can bridge some of those gaps and work together in a respectful way. I did want to also mention that we do have some continuing ongoing things. They often refer to it as socioeconomic status is one that you'll probably commonly encounter. Just kind of the social standing of either a people or a whole group of people. Education, income, occupation. You can add in other inequities, health inequities, disparities in care, in services provided, all those types of things where you can see the privilege in the outside environment, the power that is exerted over people, the effort at control, and that's usually external. So for Indigenous people, you can see that gap, you can feel that gap, you live that gap. And so when you are reaching out, just understand these factors precede you. You may not necessarily right away be trusted or believed or welcomed with open arms, but if you approach things in the right way, I think you'll find Indigenous cultures actually very accepting, very welcoming. Giving is in our nature. We just need to approach it in the right way. And speaking of approaching it in the right way, so we can understand that and improve our practices and interactions, I'm going to turn it over to Jacque.
Thank you, Wendelin. And I want to just follow up that in addition to it being just 100 years since we were considered citizens of the United States, it's been less than 50 years since we had the spiritual or religious freedom that is a tenet of American democracy. But it wasn't until 1978 that they gave American Indians that same freedom. So how do we honor that as far as the relationships, the things that Native people have been through? We start out respecting that resiliency. We started out with up to 100 million residents of Turtle Island or North America. And then at the end of the 1800s, we were down to just a few 100,000 that remained because of the genocide, the colonization, all of those things that occurred. So respecting the resiliency of those that survived. There's something there that have allowed us to survive through all of these traumas and help to maintain the culture and the traditions that culture and those traditions are some of those things that helped us survive. And that humans are just one part of nature. We look at the birds and the animals and the insects and all of those other living things as our relatives. That we are only one part of nature and that balance. And as part of that balance, we respect the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual parts of an individual that have to be kept in balance for them to be able to grow and to be the person they were meant to be. And as far as an emphasis on generosity, what you'll find in many Native homes is the perspective of generosity, in that if I have something and I don't need it right now, I'm perfectly willing to give it to you if you do, with the belief that if someday in the future I need something, you'll be willing to give that to me if you have it. So that generosity of spirit. And then things are really passed down through the oral traditions and storytelling, journey sticks, things like this that help to tell, that we call them many times creation stories. But there's a story for how different things came into being, how we learned from different situations that came up in the lives of our ancestors. We look at going, knowing that we have the support of the 7 generations of our ancestors before us, and that we will impact 7 generations forward to the children and children's children's children. Another tenet of Native values is honoring the elders. And in understanding that, I want to differentiate between the term elder and elderly. Elderly is someone who's reached a certain age, which is a lot of what like elder abuse laws and things like that are based on. Social Security, Medicare, all of those things that you get to a certain age and you get those things. Where an elder within a Native community is an honored or an esteemed person that is considered to have wisdom and knowledge that they pass on to the younger ones that are coming along. And so there's sometimes a great deal of difference between an elder and elderly. And a lot of our community service workers on the reservations will talk about their elderlies, because not all of them are elders. Some of them are pretty cantankerous and not necessarily providing wisdom. But there are elders among them that provide that wisdom and that guidance and knowledge. So be sure that you recognize the difference in the terms and careful of the language that you use. I know when I worked with Niji and then on with Niji now, we talk a lot about the language that we use with our training modules, with our website and things like that. Do we use older adult? Do we use elderly? Do we use, what term do we use? Because elder has a very specific meaning. And we want to make sure that we're not offending those elders by using it in a generic way. And then when you want to establish a relationship, say you have, and there are up to 80% of Native Americans, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiians that live off the reservation, either in surrounding towns and areas or in urban areas. In the 1950s, many American Indians were moved to big cities with the promise of jobs and affluence and things like this. And then when they got there, it didn't necessarily happen, but they were still in those urban areas. So that's why a lot of states that may not have a reservation may have a large population of Native people in those urban areas. And so in some of the caseloads that come up, there may be an elder abuse case with an urban Native. And so as part of that, you might want to make contact with the Native community to get some input on some of the needs of that Native elder and some of the resources that may be available. So how do you best make those contacts? Well, as Wendelin mentioned earlier, trust is very important, and developing that trust. So part of that is not waiting until the day you need some input on a certain case to make contact, that you really have to start a long time before that, developing those relationships, reaching out, not just saying, we're here and we're a multidisciplinary team and we're here to help you. It's kind of like we're from the government and we're here to help you. But to reach out and say, we want to learn more about your community so that we can better serve those natives that come through our system and need help. And so we would like to come and meet you and get to know you so that we can learn what is available for our Native clients, as well as where we can work together to make resources better. So become a community partner. That means maybe not just attending a powwow, but going to other community events. Be involved with things that you can interact and get to know people and develop those relationships. Another group that I work with talks about working in research at the speed of trust, that you can't do the work with a Native group any faster than what you build a trusting relationship. So keeping that in mind. Some of the best ways to do that is to set up a face-to-face meeting with your contemporaries, with the tribe or with the community Indian association or organization in the urban areas. And we do that, some of the protocols that tribes go through is when you have those initial introductions, you come with those gifts in hand, that you're showing you're not carrying weapons, you're carrying gifts to exchange. And you talk about those introductions. Many times you'll find between natives, it's like, well, who's your family? Who's your parents? Who's your grandparents? On back, however far. They want to know who you are, how you might fit in, what are the relationships? Are you a cousin? Are you an auntie? I know a dear friend of mine, her son, we've been calling on him to do some webinars lately with another group that I'm working with. And he comes on and he says, well, my auntie asked me to do this, and whatever my auntie asks of me is what I do. You know, you get that younger generation respecting that elder and that relationship, that although we don't have any biological relationship, there's another relationship level of relationship where I'm an auntie to him and to his children. There may be, you know, many times you may be working with someone and they're talking about their children, but they may not have given birth to those children. They may be someone that needed a mother. And again, thinking in terms of someone that was a, you know, what is that, a training that this other colleague did, and went up to her afterward and said, you know, I've lost my mother, I've lost my auntie. I really don't have any strong Native women to kind of guide me. And she says, I'll be your mother. And he thought, oh yeah, that's just what someone says. But he found that she was there and she was making contact with him and following up with him, and actually became a mother to him. So although there was no biological relationship, she was his mother. So recognizing some of those relationships are really important as well. You know, is this older adult that you're working with within your MDT, are they an uncle, an auntie of some of the younger ones that you can talk about or talk to? Keeping those things in mind. Next slide, please. Now, within Indian country, jurisdictional considerations are really messy. And that's probably the best way I can put it, is it's really messy. First of all, tribal sovereignty. Tribes, if you think about a tribe as another state, they're actually domestic nations within the United States. And so the sovereignty, they're able to govern themselves, make decisions about law enforcement, criminal justice on their land to a degree. That means that states have no jurisdiction over them. Except, you know, there's always exceptions, but it's important to recognize. I know during the pandemic in South Dakota, some of the tribes closed their borders in order to keep out, you know, to limit the possibility of infection, because they were losing so many tribal members. However, the governor of South Dakota did not recognize that sovereignty. And so they really went to court over whether or not the highways that went through the reservations could be blocked off. And the tribes won because they do have sovereignty over their lands. Same way, jurisdictional boundaries. You know, it can be very complex because there are tribal laws, there are county and state laws and authorities, and there are federal authorities. For the most part, that's just the beginning as far as who has jurisdiction. But, you know, if you have an elder abuse case and it's on tribal land, how that might be, go through the different court systems or whatever, is the victim Indian or non-Indian? Is the offender Indian or non-Indian? did it occur on Indian land or non-Indian land? All of that impacts where things can be charged, if anywhere. On Indian land, non-Indians really can't be charged within the tribal system, and only in the federal system if they commit a capital crime like rape or murder. And as far as financial exploitation, I don't know that I've heard of really any cases that have gone to the level that the U.S. attorney has actually taken them on. I'm not sure if there have been or not. When you're talking about then, if it's on non-Indian land, usually states have authority, but, if it's an Indian, there's a lot of gray area there as to how it can be charged. I think we have do we have that table on the NIJI website, Wendelin?
Yes.
Okay, we have a table that breaks it out by Indian, non-Indian, Indian land, or no, victim, perpetrator, and location. And then what statutes, whether state, federal, or tribal, can be charged under each of those different combinations. Because it is very complex. And just when you think you have it all figured out, they throw in Public Law 280. And Public Law 280 is where within certain states, and it was designated in the law, I think 6 states, that the states could, the tribes would give up their sovereignty to the states for certain things. And so the states then would end up doing the jurisdiction for those, providing a lot of the handling of a lot of those cases. So if you're totally confused, don't worry. That's pretty typical in dealing with all of this. There are people that get their degrees in tribal law that still have to really sit down and do some figuring to really sort out where things need to be charged. Next slide, please. Oh, wait a minute. Can we back up? Oh, you're backing up. Let's go the other way. Yeah, I thought there was a page 2 when I was
like, wait a minute.
Another thing is tribal law enforcement. Sometimes it's the tribe itself, other times it's Bureau of Indian Affairs that provides the tribal law enforcement on tribal land. And it's a matter of working with those agencies and trying to sometimes even you get to some areas that there isn't a lot of good working relationships between the states and the tribes. And it may be a car accident occurs and you don't know who's going to respond to the accident based on where the car landed or where the accident happened, which side of the line was it on, determines who was supposed to respond to it, and the other won't do anything because it's not within their jurisdiction. So it really harms people more than anything else because you get into these jurisdictional issues. And the same way with the federal and tribal court systems and getting, as I said earlier, federal jurisdiction is more major crimes where tribal is usually more civil and misdemeanor types of things. A few years ago, the Congress passed the Tribal Law and Order Act, which increased a lot of the penalties. The penalties that through tribal court is no more than a year, where with the Tribal Law and Order Act, it could go to up to 3 years that a person could be sentenced. But in order to qualify for that, they have to have a legally trained defense attorney, a legally trained prosecutor, a legally trained judge. And many tribes don't have the money to pay for all of that. So they can't make use of the Tribal Law and Order Act. So they go back to that maximum of 1 year, and there's a lot more limitations on what they can actually charge and what they can utilize. This is why a lot of times in Indian country, you find not only do they not want people to go to jail, but they want to find more healing ways of dealing with things than a punitive way. And in the federal and tribal court systems, navigating those relationships between tribal, federal, and state, especially when you get those cross-jurisdictional issues, are really difficult, especially when you're trying to be in compliance with the Indian Civil Rights Act and other laws. Other things you'd like to say about jurisdiction, Wendelin? It's a really complex issue.
No, I think you described it correctly, because it really does depend on how the different tribes have their justice system set up. And, if they did share or give that jurisdiction to others because they didn't have resources, sometimes they now have resources and they'll attempt to take that authority back. So it's not even just a static thing that we could provide a map, because it's in flux, it can be changing. So it's always something to just navigate carefully and feel out piece by piece. But I like how you listed the main things to consider in terms of where it happened, what is the race of the victim and of the offender. Based on that, you can get to the bottom of it with some digging.
Okay. Next slide, please. So that's kind of what we had to present. There are lots of other things to go into, and we could probably do another hour on each slide at least. But we wanted to kind of leave a little bit of time for some questions. If anybody has questions they'd like to ask, either put it in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself so we can hear your question or comment. Nothing? Or it just takes a long time to type it out?
I had a comment, and maybe this will get people talking, but I hadn't heard of, let me see, was it Rule 280 law?
Public Law 280?
280. So I was really glad to hear about that, because what it really brings to mind for me is the importance of an E-MDT team with tribal partners to really do a lot of cross education with each other, so they understand each other as far as not only jurisdictional, but all the other aspects of working with your tribal partners. I'm really thankful that you brought that up, and I see that someone has something in the now.
And Marty, I'll comment on that. Like Minnesota is virtually a Public Law 280 state, in that all but one tribe in Minnesota has has ceded their jurisdiction to the state of Minnesota. The one that doesn't is Red Lake, and they've maintained their tribal sovereignty. So that's kind of an example of a public law 280 state. But Alaska and a few others are also 280 states. So Krista has asked, she's in New Hampshire, a state that has no federally recognized tribes. Do we have any specific advice for her as the MDT coordinator? I would start with saying, within any of your major urban areas, do you have any American Indian centers or anything like that, where is a gathering place for the Native people in that community that you could work with, starting to build a relationship with them, so that as you have, you know, Native cases that come up for your MDT, that you're able to work with them.
I'm only aware of one center. We do have, and it's not in an urban area, and most of our state is rural. We do have a center. It's not staffed. It's a land location where powwows are sometimes held. We have in the urban centers more multicultural centers that work mostly with immigrants. We have taken in a lot of refugee populations in New Hampshire. But there's not, and if it's occurring, I'm not hearing about it. So I'm not even sure where to start.
Well, and a lot of what we've talked about today can apply to your immigrant clients, as far as the cultural humility and all of that. But you know, the legal stuff isn't quite the same, because that's particular to American Indians, Alaska Natives, because of the relationship they have with the United States government. So that's more of a political designation rather than a racial designation. But I would say, if there's any group or any gathering place, you said there's a place that they have powwows and all. If there is a place, I know sometimes the senior nutrition centers and things like that may have Title VI funding, which is for natives. And you can maybe get access that way to be able to talk with them about, you know, what the needs are, and building that relationship, so that if you have a case come up, that you can maybe get some help as to what resources may be available. Because one of the problems with states such as yours is that like Indian Health Service, there isn't an Indian Health Service there. So where do they get their health care? How do they access other resources that are available to those that are enrolled? And we talk about enrolled and descendants, and there's a lot of different statuses that determine what you're eligible for. I hope that's helpful. Okay. Anyone else?
I would just add to, maybe sometimes if you're looking for that outreach, interestingly, sometimes like parents and children, they'll meet each other, they start forming a community. So sometimes even in your local schools, you may find like an Indigenous parents group or an after school program that a lot of the Indigenous youth and their parents participate in. And from there, you can start making a segue into whatever little local culture they've kind of worked at forming for themselves. So sometimes that can be another avenue.
Johnson O'Malley programs within the schools are the education programs for Indian youth or Indian children. Okay,
Dr. Gray, I had a question about membership on EMDTs for non-tribal teams. Like, is there value in thinking about like more permanent, visible membership from tribal communities on these teams? And what, like, if there was going to be a pitch to someone, like, what would your recommendation be to, like, what level and what entity would should they be looking into?
well, I think some of it may depend upon the how they're involved with cases with natives. But some of that, I would say, it is a matter of it can help to, I think it can help to really educate your team. Just like adding someone like from the different immigrant groups and things like that to a team can help, or having a subgroup that can be pulled from on a case-by-case basis as needed. But I think building that relationship as to this is what we are and this is what we do, and we would like to extend an invitation to you. Is this something that would be of value to your community? It's not something, you know, we have to have a representative from this group,
Right.
but it's their choice as well as to whether or not that's something that will help their community.
And I would add, in terms of those attempts to build trust, often it does work a lot better if they serve almost like a go-between. They can make the introduction about, oh, I'd like you to meet this great woman, Grace, that I work with. Why don't, Grace, you come to this local meeting that we're having? And it goes a lot further than you just inviting yourself or us not knowing you exist, right? So they can serve kind of as that liaison to make those introductions. That can go a long ways too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great.
I see in the chat
Thanks,
that
Krista.
Krista has found something that might be a stepping stone for you, the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective. Yeah.
Excellent. Great job. It's amazing what we can find on Google.
I know, it's amazing. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to launch 3 very quick polls. And I just want to stress that the importance of these polls are to not only help us to understand whether this information is something that you can incorporate into your MDTs, but also we can give this information to funders and they can see the value in this programming, and that the importance of putting funds towards this issue. So anyway, I'm going to just launch 3 quick polls. I promise they won't take long.
You want to stop sharing, Wendelin, and that way
Might show up a little
she
better.
can.
Okay, thank you for taking a moment to fill out those polls. Any last questions or thoughts, or any last parting thoughts from Dr. Gray or Dr. Hume?
I would just say, thank you for hosting us and having us here. And I think it's really great when people, express that interest. Like we want to be inclusive, we want to be involved, we want to do the best we can, because much like Jackie said, people keep asking like, who's your family? Where are you from? And but another common question is, why do you want to do this? Why are you doing this? And when you approach this with a good way, we're trying to establish trust. We want to know what would help you. Those are true and good desires that would be recognized and responded to favorably. So thank you for bringing this up. I think it's very helpful. I think you're muted, Jackie.
I was just gonna say, asking how you can meet the cultural needs of your clients who can help to, increase that. That, you're wanting to provide a better service. You aren't coming in to tell them what to do. So thank you all for having us today. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.